The Red House in Romania, a true story if you believe me. I should have never trusted the Airbnb reviews. That's how I always begin when people ask why I no longer travel alone. It's also the first thought that flashes through my head when I wake up drenched in sweat, unsure whether it was a dream or memory. Maybe both. It's hard to explain something like this, especially when the most terrifying parts didn't leave any real evidence, just the shadows in my mind and the black mold that still creeps up the corners of my dreams. My name is Sarah Milburn. I'm a doctoral candidate in anthropology, and in the spring of 2023, I received a modest travel grant to document surviving traces of folk religions across Eastern Europe. I'd always been drawn to the blurred space where belief turns into reality, the stories people still whisper, the superstitions passed from grandmother to granddaughter, the places where the map ends and the locals don't dare go. My research took me through parts of Bulgaria and Ukraine before I crossed into Romania, exhausted but still hungry for the stories. I plan to spend 5 days in Cluj-Napoca, a beautiful and culturally vibrant city in Transylvania. Most of my focus was on Hoia Baciu Forest, sometimes called the Bermuda Triangle of Romania. I had read enough accounts of strange phenomena there, missing hikers, glowing orbs, malformed trees growing in spirals, to know the forest had folkloric weight, even if I didn't expect anything supernatural. The place had the kind of magnetic pull that good researchers either follow or avoid. I followed. Instead of booking a hotel in the city, I found an Airbnb listing 15 minutes from the edge of the forest. The photos were almost too picturesque, a 19th century farmhouse with red wooden siding, ivy climbing up the stone chimney, and wildflowers growing in an unkempt garden that looked torn from a painting. It had 5 stars across the board. Cozy, quiet, peaceful. Perfect for a solo writing retreat, one review said. Feels like time doesn't exist here, said another. I didn't think it was strange that the reviews were all from over a year ago. I should have. The driver who picked me up from the bus depot glanced at the address and shook his head, muttering under his breath in Romanian. I caught the word pădure, forest. Then another word I didn't recognize. I asked him to repeat it, but he only shook his head harder and dropped me at the base of a narrow dirt road winding up through the hills. The forest loomed beyond the horizon like a warning. The house sat at the top of the hill like something meant to be forgotten. The siding was a faded rust color, cracked and peeling. It looked far more weathered than in the photos, like it had aged 50 years since they were taken. The red paint was darker, wetter, almost like it bled. I made my way to the porch, dragging my suitcase over the uneven flagstones. The wind had gone still and the birds had stopped singing. Not in a poetic way, in a deeply wrong, hushed way. No dogs barked in the distance, no insects buzzed. There was only the sound of my footsteps and my own breath. The front door opened without resistance. There was no lock, no key waiting. Just a hollow creak that echoed too long, like the house was breathing me in. Inside, the air was cool and damp, laced with the faint scent of lavender and something less pleasant, mildew or maybe decay. The walls were wood-paneled and stained, the floors creaked with every step, and the only light came from the low, slanted windows. The furniture was rustic, but intact. A wood-fire stove sat unused. There was a small table, a single bed with a wool blanket, and an ancient armoire with ornate carvings I couldn't quite make out. When I pushed open the armoire, it stopped short, maybe a foot in. Something blocked it. I assumed it was just warped wood. I'd seen worse in other rural stays. I unpacked my things, set my notebook and field recorder on the table, and walked the perimeter of the property. The land sloped gently behind the house and fell into dense forest, the Hoia Baciu boundary. Even though the sun was still up, the shadows between the trees felt unnatural. My skin prickled. The wind died completely. Then I saw something that made my chest tighten. A curtain moved in the upstairs window, the second-story window directly above the front door. I stood there squinting, willing myself to believe it was just the breeze. But I couldn't feel any breeze. And I hadn't seen a staircase inside. The photos hadn't shown a second story. When I went back in, I searched carefully. No stairs, no ladder, no pull-down attic. I knocked on the ceiling panels above the main room, but everything sounded solid. If there was a second floor, it was sealed off. That night, I lit a fire and tried to write, but my thoughts kept drifting. I couldn't stop checking the window. My field recorder picked up odd static bursts when left on overnight, and at one point it caught what sounded like a whisper. 3 syllables. Not Romanian. The fire had burned down by 2 a.m., and the cold was unbearable. I woke up gasping, my chest tight, like something had been pressing down on me. My phone screen glowed with the time, 2:12. The fire was dead. The air was ice. And above me, in the ceiling, I heard footsteps. Heavy, dragging footsteps. Slow, measured. They moved in circles, as if someone were pacing above my bed around the perimeter of a room I wasn't supposed to know existed. I couldn't move. I lay there, paralyzed, for what felt like an hour. Then the footsteps stopped, and I heard 3 knocks. Not from the ceiling. From inside the armoire. I wanted to scream, but couldn't. My body wouldn't cooperate. I lay back, eyes wide open, until the light started bleeding in through the windows. The next morning, I went into town. My hands shook the whole bus ride. I needed answers. I needed to know what I had stepped into. The Cluj-Napoca Public Library was old and dim, but the woman at the front desk, Elena, looked up kindly when I asked about local legends in the area. She was in her 70s, with kind eyes and excellent English. When I mentioned the Airbnb address, her demeanor changed instantly. She went quiet, then motioned for me to follow her to a back room. She pulled an old cloth-bound book from a locked cabinet and opened it to a section marked with a faded ribbon. "You said The Red House by Hoya Baciu?" she asked. "Yes, it's listed on Airbnb. I stayed there last night." Elena's face paled. She turned the book toward me. Baron Mihai Lupu, 1874. Built the house for his family after marrying a much younger woman from Brașov. Within 3 years, every member of the household was dead. The wife, the children, the servants. Official records were vague, but rumors included blood rites, demonic pacts, forest offerings. The house was said to be a threshold, a term I didn't like. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means something passed through, or still does." The church refused to bless the ground. It was supposed to be demolished after the war, but the demolition crew refused to return after one night on the property. I showed her the Airbnb photo. She shook her head slowly. "This photo is old, from before the fire. The second floor doesn't exist anymore." "But I saw it," I whispered. "You shouldn't have gone." That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed fully dressed, flashlight in hand, back against the wall. The house groaned and shifted as the wind picked up, but no trees moved outside. At 3:33 a.m., the armoire opened again, this time on its own. Inside was not the warped wood I'd expected. There was a narrow, winding staircase descending into blackness. The steps were uneven, carved stone, and the air that rose from below smelled wet, like soil, copper, and rot. My flashlight flickered the moment I pointed it down. The light wouldn't hold. I didn't go down. I shut the armoire and pushed a chair in front of it. The house made no sound for the rest of the night. That was somehow worse. By sunrise, I had made up my mind to leave. I threw everything into my backpack, took one last photo of the front door, and found that there was no handle on the inside. It was smooth wood, nailed shut, like someone wanted to keep me in. I smashed a window and climbed out. My hands bled. The wind was screaming now, and a fog had rolled in so thick I could barely see the base of the path. Elena picked me up within an hour of my call. She didn't ask questions. She handed me a rosary and told me to throw it into the fire before bed. I didn't ask why. I just nodded. I stayed at a hotel that night in the center of Cluj. I turned on every light. I didn't sleep. When I tried to show someone who I'd taken of the front door, it wouldn't open. Every file I took at that house was corrupted. Either static, blackness, or twisted, double-exposed shapes I couldn't make sense of. Except for one photo. The very first one I took, of me standing in the entryway mirror. In the reflection just behind my shoulder, something stood in the dark. Antlers. No face. Long arms. Watching. 6 months later, I got an email from Airbnb. Apologies for the disturbing experience. The listing had been removed. The host had been banned. They refunded my money. But that wasn't the part that haunted me. It was the audio clip from my recorder. A single file that somehow wasn't damaged. In it, I'm snoring softly. Then the sound cuts sharply as if something moved very close to the microphone. Then comes the whisper, low and guttural, in a language I still haven't identified. I changed my dissertation. I don't study forest spirits anymore. I haven't traveled alone since. And I'll never stay in another Airbnb because I didn't escape that house. I left something of myself there. And sometimes when the lights are off and I hear knocking from my closet, I think maybe it followed me home. My name is Jason Kim, and I was 28 when I thought I could handle anything the world had to offer. I had already soloed the Trans-Siberian Railway, slept on rooftops in Istanbul, and gotten food poisoning in 7 countries. I prided myself on being the kind of traveler who avoided the tourist traps and sought the raw, the untouched, the real. But I didn't understand what real meant until I visited northeastern China. And I still wake up sweating at 3:11 a.m., knowing that something came back with me. It started as a casual detour. I was in Harbin on a freelance assignment, photographing decaying Soviet architecture for a Hong Kong design magazine. I'd already shot the old domes and busted concrete towers when I stumbled across an obscure forum post about a place called Zhongma Fortress. It mentioned rusted ruins, hidden tunnels, and the vague warning, "Don't go looking if you don't want to know." That's always the bait for me. If someone says not to go, I go. The fortress was about 2 hours from Harbin, buried in the forest outside a town called Beiyinhe. The original structures, they said, had been razed after the war, but remnants remained if you knew where to look. It had been the prototype site for Unit 731, Japan's infamous wartime biological warfare program. Before the larger complex in Pingfang, there was Zhongma. I thought it would be just another ruin. Concrete slabs, moss, maybe a few ominous stains. I'd photograph the place in black and white, send it to my editor, and maybe get a blurb in a war history blog. That was the plan. I didn't plan on meeting the old man. He was waiting by the train stop at Beiying when I arrived, hunched in a gray jacket, face like aged wood, smoking something hand-rolled. He looked at me like he had expected me. "You're Korean?" he asked in Mandarin. I nodded. "American-Korean parents," he grunted. Still not Chinese. He didn't smile, didn't offer a name, just said, "You want to see the Japanese place?" I nodded again, and he started walking. We walked for 20 minutes along a dirt trail flanked by silent pine trees. No birds sang. No insects chirped. It was like sound itself had been cauterized from the air. The man said nothing. Every now and then he would glance over his shoulder as if checking to make sure we weren't being followed, but I never saw anything behind us. Eventually, we reached a clearing. There wasn't much to see at first, just the stone outline of a foundation, overgrown with weeds, and what looked like a collapsed water tower covered in vines. "This is where they started," he said. "Before Pingfang. Before the Americans helped hide it all." I asked what happened here. He didn't answer, just pointed toward a rusted iron door half buried in the dirt. You wouldn't notice it unless you were looking for it. It groaned open when I pulled, revealing a concrete stairwell descending into the ground. "Don't go past the red marks," the man said. I laughed. He didn't. He didn't follow me in. I should have turned back right then. But the air down there was cool, and I was convinced that whatever was left would make for brilliant photos. Places like this had an energy to them. Not just history, presence. The stairs led to a narrow corridor with flaking white walls and rust-covered pipes running overhead. Mold clustered in strange, almost circular patterns, and the smell was a mix of old iron and wet stone. My flashlight barely penetrated the dark. I passed rusted gurneys, broken tiles, something that might have been an examination table. Then I saw the red marks, faded paint smeared on the wall like a warning. They formed a line across the hallway, with 2 handprints just beneath, like someone had tried to claw their way back. That's where I should have stopped. But I stepped over. The air changed instantly. It wasn't just colder, it was wrong. Heavy, syrup thick. My ears popped, and my heart started pounding in a strange rhythm. Too fast, too loud. The corridor curved, and then I reached it. A room. Windowless. Maybe 10 feet wide. The walls were covered in peeling diagrams, anatomical charts, detailed sketches in Japanese. One showed a man strapped down, organs exposed. Another showed rats being fed something and vomiting blood. A single surgical light hung overhead, long dead. In the corner of the room was a large glass container, maybe 4 feet tall, cloudy with time. Something moved inside it. I stepped closer. It wasn't a person exactly, or maybe it had been once. The thing floating in the yellowed fluid had no eyes, no skin, just a tangle of muscle and sinew. But it twitched, its mouth opened, and I heard a voice, not in my ears, in my mind. A scream. I stumbled backward, tripped over a metal tray, and scrambled for the hall. As I reached the curve again, my flashlight flickered out. Total darkness, then footsteps behind me. Wet, shuffling. I ran, not caring about direction, just trying to get away. Every turn felt familiar. Every hallway echoed back my breath. At one point I passed a cell, a real prison cell, steel bars still intact, and something inside scraped across the floor as I went by. When I finally saw the stairs again, I thought I was safe. But they were different, longer. And when I emerged, the sky was black. The old man was gone, and the forest looked wrong. I ran. I don't remember how far, only that I didn't see the town again for hours. When I finally reached the train station, it was empty. Not closed. Empty, like no one had been there for decades. The signage was faded, and the digital clock over the platform read 0311, and stayed at 0311. Even when my phone said 8:45 a.m. When I got back to Harbin, things got worse. My photos were blank. All of them. Every image from the fortress was pure black, except one, the last photo I'd taken before the scream. It showed the corridor, and at the end of it, silhouetted in the dark, something stood. Arms too long, head too small, watching. I deleted it, but it came back. A week later, I woke up in my hotel room with mud on my feet. I hadn't left the room. My door was still chained, but my soles were caked with dirt, and the smell in the room was iron and mold. Back in the US, I went to a doctor. I'd started hearing things. Whispers, screams in Japanese I couldn't translate. I started waking up at exactly 3:11 a.m. every night, no matter what time I went to bed. My nose bled constantly. My blood work came back inconclusive. My body temperature was 2 degrees low, and I started dreaming in black and white. The old man never answered my calls again. I searched for him online, even checked Chinese forums. No one remembered him. And when I posted about the fortress, my account was deleted. Someone, or something, doesn't want the world to remember Zhongma. But I do, because I think part of me is still down there, and part of it came back with me. I see it sometimes, a reflection in dark windows, a shadow that doesn't match. I hear metal trays sliding when I walk by hospitals, and my nose still bleeds every year on the same day I cross that red line. I tell this story not for closure. There won't be any. I tell it because someone else will go. They always do. And when you hear the scream, don't run. It wants you to run. That's how it follows. My name is Paul Whitaker. I used to be a maritime historian. I suppose technically I still am. But after what happened in 2021, I haven't been able to step foot on a boat, look at a lighthouse, or even listen to the crash of waves without needing to throw up. I was 37 when it happened. A research trip to the Outer Hebrides, specifically to Eilean Mor, one of the Flannan Isles. A haunting, wind-blasted rock jutting from the sea, miles from the nearest village. You've probably heard of it. Even if the name doesn't ring a bell, you've probably encountered the story. 3 lighthouse keepers vanished without a trace in December 1900. The logbook found inside described a storm that never occurred, a sense of fear and prayer that didn't match the hardened nature of the men stationed there. No bodies were ever recovered. No signs of struggle. The light had gone out and the island had gone quiet. That mystery had haunted me since I was a kid. The older I got, the more obsessed I became with filling in the maritime disappearances. That passion led me through grad school and into a teaching position at a small but respected university in Cornwall. When I received an opportunity to partner with a Scottish coastal preservation project and conduct on-site documentation of surviving lighthouse structures, I practically begged to be assigned to Eilean Mor. The island had been uninhabited for over a century. The lighthouse was still standing, but no longer functional, a decaying monument to the vanished. There was no tourism, no scheduled ferries. I had to get special permissions from the Northern Lighthouse Board and coordinate with a retired fisherman named Angus McIver, who still made the dangerous crossing when the weather allowed. "Place is cursed," Angus said, squinting at the sky. "I'll take you there, but I'm not staying the night." I told him that was fine. I had a portable generator, my own gear, a backup radio, and a rigid sense of overconfidence I now recognize as fatal. I wanted to spend 2 nights alone in the lighthouse, document the structure, take some atmospheric field recordings, and leave with enough material to write a definitive piece. "Storm's coming," Angus said when he dropped me off. "Might not be able to get you until the 3rd day." "That's all right," I said, smiling like a fool. "I've got enough tea and biscuits to last the week." He didn't laugh. He turned his boat and left me there, alone on a chunk of black rock jutting from an endless gray sea. I watched the boat vanish into the mist, then hoisted my pack and started up the winding stairs toward the tower. The island was dead silent. Even the birds were distant. Just the soft crunch of gravel underfoot and the sound of wind sliding past the cliff edges. The lighthouse loomed like a skeletal finger, tall and pale and scarred by salt. Inside, the entry hall smelled of mildew and cold stone. The air felt unnaturally still. Dust motes floated in my flashlight beam, and every creak of the floorboards echoed like a whisper. The furniture inside was mostly gone, just a table, a cracked mirror, and 3 narrow cots stripped to their rusted frames. One of the cots had scratch marks on the wood. That night, I set up my sleeping bag in the main chamber just beneath the spiral stairs that led up to the lantern room. I lit a few candles for atmosphere and tried to record some background ambience, but the mic picked up strange inconsistencies, shifts in tone, intermittent pulses of low-frequency static, and what sounded like a distant, rhythmic knock. I chalked it up to wind. The mind plays tricks when you're alone. At midnight, the generator shut off. Not out of power, just stopped. I rebooted it, checked all the connections. Nothing looked wrong. When I turned on the radio to test reception, I picked up something odd on the emergency frequency. A voice, a man's voice, low and wet sounding, repeating the same phrase in Gaelic. My Gaelic is poor, but I understood enough to catch one word: fog. I called out into the room, "Who's there?" The radio cut out. Then the door upstairs slammed shut. I hadn't even opened it. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed the tower stairs. The door to the lantern room was closed tight. When I pushed it open, the beam of my flashlight hit the glass windows and caught movement, not reflection. Movement. Something had been standing there. A shadow that wasn't mine ducked out of sight. I turned on the lantern, which I'd been told didn't work, but it flickered to life. Dim orange at first, then brighter. It spun, slowly. Out at sea, I could see a ship. Small, old, moving too fast. It didn't have lights, and as the lantern rotated, the ship vanished, like it had never been there at all. I stayed up most of the night, reading the old lighthouse logs, copies of which I had printed before the trip. The last entries from 1900 described things that couldn't be explained. One keeper seeing a great beast of black mist rising from the sea, another speaking of voices in the walls, and the last entry simply reading, "He is in the light now." I thought it was metaphor. I don't anymore. The second day was worse. The weather turned. Winds pounded the cliffs, waves slammed the rocks, and the fog became so dense I couldn't see past the doorway. I recorded more audio and played it back in the evening. Among the wind and hiss, I could hear 3 voices whispering in Gaelic, the same phrase over and over. "He comes when the beacon turns." That night, the lantern turned on by itself. The beam swept the sea, slow and smooth, and every time it rotated, I saw something closer. A shape, man-sized, black and glistening, crawling up the rocks like it didn't need limbs. It didn't blink. It didn't stop. Just slowly made its way up the western face of the island with each pulse of light. I shut off the lantern, and the shape was suddenly inches from the glass. It didn't have a face, just a wet, pulsing skin stretched over bones that didn't make sense. It grinned. I don't know how else to describe it. Not with teeth, just a tightening of the face like it learned how to smile. My name is Brooke Daly. I was 29 when I took what was supposed to be a soul-searching trip through Southeast Asia. 3 months to find myself, whatever that meant, after quitting a job I hated and a relationship that had slowly bled dry. I wanted something real, something raw. And if I'm being honest, I wanted stories, the kind of experiences that sound wild over drinks back home. I got one. Too real. too raw, and not the kind you can laugh about later. This happened in late 2022. I'd already wandered through Thailand and Laos with a tangle of other backpackers before crossing into Cambodia, where everything felt heavier, quieter. The landscapes were stunning, especially out in the provinces. You could ride for hours through green fields broken only by skinny palm trees and the occasional tin roof house on stilts. The people were kind, but behind their eyes sometimes there was this depth, like they'd seen something I hadn't and would never understand. I made it to Kampong Tom by accident, really. A guy I met in Siem Reap said it was more authentic, less touristy. He also said I could volunteer with a local NGO there teaching English to village kids. I said yes before checking the details. They sent me to a village about 20 kilometers outside the main town. No name on Google Maps, just dirt roads and a single crumbling pagoda. I was put up in a family's stilt house, a quiet, reserved woman named Srey and her young son Dara. Her husband had died in a construction accident in Phnom Penh years ago, she said. She spoke some English, enough to help me settle in. The rest I picked up from Dara's giggles and a battered phrase book. Everything was peaceful at first. Days were hot, nights filled with frogs and rustling leaves. The food was good, if unfamiliar. I helped in the little school during the day, taught Dara card games in the evening, and tried to write in my journal by candlelight. But the fields behind the house, they were wrong. They stretched flat and empty behind the village, shimmering in heat and silent as a photograph. Nothing grew there, even though irrigation ditches ran through it. Not rice, not weeds, and no animals wandered close. No dogs, no buffalo. Even the birds avoided it. You'd see them circling and then swerving hard as if repelled. I asked Srey why no one farmed there. She looked at me without smiling and said, "That land is hungry." I thought she meant poor soil. I was wrong. That night, Dara asked if I wanted to see the place where the men used to sleep under the ground. I thought he meant a bunker, a war remnant. He kept tugging my sleeve, begging, so I said yes. We walked behind the house at twilight, past the first ridge of dust and the skeletal palms until we reached the edge of that dead field. Even standing at the edge made my skin go cold. Dara pointed. There, under the earth, they screamed, and then they didn't. "What do you mean?" I asked gently. He shrugged like it was obvious. "The black bags, the poles, like the monk said." Srey called him back before I could ask more. Her voice was sharp, not angry, afraid. Later that night, I asked her directly what had happened in that field. She avoided my eyes. "It was Khmer Rouge camp," she said. "Not in the records. Only the village knows. They killed the people there. Teachers, monks, sick ones." I didn't sleep well. I heard things, whispers outside the window, soft feet on the stairs, even though no one could be there. The house was elevated 5 feet off the ground, and I locked the stair gate. On the third night, I woke at 3:16 a.m., a number I'd later learn was carved into one of the trees near the field. I didn't wake from a sound. I just sat up like I'd been pulled upward by a string. At the foot of my mat, a shape was crouched, not standing, not sitting. Crouched. I couldn't see its face. It looked soaked, like it had been pulled from water or mud. I couldn't scream, couldn't breathe. Then it whispered something in Khmer. I didn't understand it at the time, but I remember the word complo. The next morning, I asked Srey what that meant. She dropped the dish she was washing. Complo means something like unfinished or incomplete. It's also a term used for ghosts who died violently and were never buried properly. Spirits trapped in our world, always crouched, always hungry. After that, I tried to keep away from the field. I focused on the school. I tried to rationalize the night vision as a dream. But things got worse. I started hearing scratching beneath the floorboards at night. Water would drip from the ceiling, even though it hadn't rained. My journal pages would be soaked when I woke up, and only the pages where I'd written about the field. Then one morning, Dara was gone. No one had seen him leave. Srey tore through the village screaming his name. We found him sitting at the edge of the field, barefoot, smiling faintly. He had mud in his mouth, packed in his cheeks like he'd tried to eat it. He wouldn't speak for 3 days. When he finally did, all he said was, "They told me the lights are still on down there." Srey broke down crying. I was ready to leave. I told her I'd head back to town the next morning. She begged me not to go at night. She made me promise to light incense at every corner of the house before sleeping. I tried. I did. But one of the incense sticks wouldn't light. It was the one nearest the back window, the one facing the field. That night, I heard the voices again, more this time, men and women, children, all whispering in a language I didn't speak, but I knew what they wanted. Recognition, memory, closure. I opened the window. I shouldn't have. The field was glowing, not brightly, just the soft shimmer of heat lightning, except there wasn't a storm. The glow moved, and inside it, I saw figures. Walking, some were crawling, all soaked, all hunched, none had faces, just hollow smears where their eyes and mouths should be. One of them looked straight at me, it opened its mouth wider and wider, and I woke up screaming. Srey was beside me, holding my shoulders. "You cannot look," she said, shaking. "They want eyes. They want to be seen." The next morning, I left. I don't even remember the tuk-tuk ride out. My photos from the village were all corrupted, overexposed, or wiped blank. Except one. A shot of the rice field at dawn, empty. But when I showed it to a friend months later, he pointed at the corner. There was someone in the frame, crouched, watching. I haven't been back to Cambodia. I still get letters from Srey sometimes. She says Dara is doing better, that the field is quiet again. But once, in one of her letters, she added a line she hadn't meant to translate. In Khmer it said, "One of them followed you. They say your house has wet footprints." My name is Alex Murrow. I'm 34, and until 4 years ago, I worked as a freelance journalist covering political disappearances, primarily in Latin America. I've always been drawn to places where silence suffocates history, where trauma is still buried, sometimes literally, under layers of denial and time. What happened to me in Argentina started as a research trip. It ended with me waking up every night at 4:17 a.m., choking on dirt that isn't there, hearing screams that don't belong in this world. It started in 2021 when I was living in Mexico City. I just published a long-form investigative piece on CIA-backed coups in the 1970s when an editor from a European magazine approached me. She wanted something darker, more atmospheric. "Ghosts of history," she said. She handed me a list of forgotten locations, shuttered prisons, black sites, rural disappearances. Argentina was at the top of the list. During the Dirty War, the military junta led by Videla and his death squads systematically disappeared dissidents, students, intellectuals, union leaders, anyone even suspected of being subversive. Up to 30,000 people were taken, tortured, and killed. Most were never found. I knew some of that, but not what I was walking into. The assignment was to focus on unofficial sites, not ESMA, the naval school in Buenos Aires that had become the best-known torture facility, now a museum. My target was rural, an old estancia north of Santa Fe, deep in soy country. On no map, no official record, but referenced in several survivor testimonies as La Estancia donde el viento no entra, the ranch where the wind doesn't enter. I tracked the land coordinates through an archival police memo leaked by a retired officer. It was listed as temporarily requisitioned agricultural asset. The last activity recorded was in 1981. I rented a beat-up Renault in Santa Fe and drove north. The roads narrowed, the sky got wider, green plains turned to dry yellow, and the air began to feel heavier, like it was carrying the weight of things not said. By the time I reached the entrance gate, I'd passed 2 towns where no one would talk to me. An old man at a gas station saw my notepad and said, "You won't find what you're looking for, senor, but it might find you." The estancia was down a cracked, dust-blown road flanked by eucalyptus trees. The archway overhead still bore the old name, Estancia San Emilio. The gates were open, no chain, no sign of life. The main house sat on a gentle rise, 2 stories, clay tile roof, shuttered windows like narrowed eyes. To the left were long brick barracks, maybe old farm worker housing or cells. To the right, a crumbling silo, partially collapsed. No birds sang, no dogs barked, only the wind brushing through brittle grass. I parked near the steps and walked to the front door. It was slightly ajar. The air inside was cold. Not cool, cold like a basement. Dust covered everything, but the footprints I left were the only ones. I thought, until I reached the dining hall. There were boot prints in the dust. Military issue, spaced wide apart, like someone had paced back and forth recently. But they faded out halfway to the window and just stopped. No turn, no retreat. The house was hollow but intact, chairs stacked against the walls, metal hooks bolted into exposed beams, and strange, deep gouges in the floor near the fireplace. I took photos. My phone battery dropped from 87% to 12% in minutes. I hadn't even turned on GPS. I made my way to the back room. The air got heavier, and there, carved into the wall in crude letters, was a name: Alicia. I didn't know it yet, but that name would return. I set up camp in the main hall. I had a sleeping mat, food, water, and 2 small audio recorders I planned to leave running overnight. I wasn't expecting ghosts. I wanted audio anomalies, patterns, footsteps, anything that could hint at unrecorded activity from the dictatorship. I started to feel dizzy at sunset. The wind outside stopped completely. The house began to creak, not from settling but from tension, like it was holding its breath. Then, as night fell, I started hearing voices. Not clear, faint, like radio static 2 rooms away. I followed the sound down the hallway. My flashlight flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. The back door to the estancia had a rusted iron bolt. I opened it. Beyond it was the field, flat, empty. The grass here was gray instead of yellow. And in the distance I saw shapes, people, at least a dozen, all standing still, facing the house, not moving, not blinking, just watching. I turned away, shut the door, locked it. That night I dreamt of soil, being buried face down alive, a voice whispering in my ear in Spanish, "Ahora tú eres el archivo." Now, you are the archive. I woke up choking. When I played the audio back, there were no voices. But at 4:17 a.m., one of the recorders picked up a single sharp sound, a scream. Then nothing. The next day, I explored the barracks. Inside, I found scratched walls, loops of leather straps, and more names etched into the bricks. Marcos, Elisa, Diego, Alicia. Alicia again. Near one corner, I found something buried in the dirt, a metal medallion, oval, silver. On it, a tiny engraving, Virgin del Luján, a common pendant, except the back had words carved in a trembling hand. No me olvides. Don't forget me. I didn't realize until that night that I'd brought it inside. I'd left it in my jacket pocket, but when I returned to the main hall, it was sitting on my mat. Clean, warm. I tried to sleep anyway, but I heard footsteps all night, doors opening and closing, soft weeping beneath the floor. At exactly 4:17 a.m., the fire pit in the center of the room flared to life. No logs, no flame source, just fire. And from the shadows behind it, a figure stepped forward. A woman, young, shoulder-length hair, bare feet streaked with blood and dust. She pointed at the pendant. Then she spoke. "Dile que no fui cobarde." Tell them I wasn't a coward. I tried to stand, but my body wouldn't move. I could only nod. She turned and walked backward into the fire. Gone. When I woke, it was daylight. No fire, no footprints. The pendant was gone. I packed everything and left. Drove straight to Santa Fe, hands shaking the whole way. Slept in my car. Left the country 2 days later. Weeks passed. I tried to forget. Then I got an email. No sender, no subject, just a single image attachment. It was a scan of a government memo dated 1982. A debriefing. The name Alicia Martinez was circled, and beneath it a handwritten note. Transfer to San Emilio. Designate as invisible. She had been sent there. She had died there. And she had found me. I tried to tell people, but no one listens. I wrote the story. No one would publish it. Editors disappeared. Sites crashed. One publisher told me, "We don't want problems with them." I asked who them was. He hung up. Now, every year on October 14th, the night I stayed at the estancia, I find the pendant in my pocket. And always at 4:17 a.m., I hear her whisper, "I wasn't a coward." If you made it through all 5 stories, I hope you're still somewhere with the lights on, somewhere far from ocean cliffs, abandoned fields, and broken stairwells leading underground. These weren't just ghost stories. They were echoes, faint traces of things that really happened. The places are real. The events behind them are carved into our world, even if we pretend not to see them. Every missing person, every whispered name, every scar left behind by history leaves a fingerprint. And some of those fingerprints don't fade. Some leave stains. So, if you ever find yourself drawn to the forgotten corners of the world, those places just off the map where the wind falls silent and your phone stops working, take a moment before you go. Ask yourself what you're willing to bring home and what might follow you back, because the past doesn't rest, and sometimes it remembers you. Be safe, sleep light, and whatever you do, if you hear your name spoken by a voice you don't recognize, don't answer.